These picking ladders, because we've got what, 438-foot ones, or
Yeah,
how?
northern New York, and they had a special grade of spruce, I think.
Well, we've got.
I'll get you to turn your shoulders, just kind of square them up to. There you go. Yep, great.
Okay.
We got 3 that were RD King ladders and 1 hydric ladder, and I don't know if we have a cypress ladder or not, but I don't think so. It's all probably spruce.
They call split rails.
They're good.
They were called split rails.
Yeah, so we picked up those 4 ladders, and they're 38 feet. But where did we get citrus ladders from, and the harvesting ladders and so forth?
The bulk of our manufactured ladders came from New York State, Babcock Ladder Company, because there was a type of lumber up there that had a very straight grain, so forth, that met standards. They had a different standard rather than ABC that we got today of lumber, and it was the distance between the rings in the tree and the straightness of the ladder and the straightness of the rung. But anyway, they were made up there for years until they finally ran out of that type of lumber up there. And they had the market on the thing, and many of our trees in those days, prior to the '62 freeze, were quite tall, and 30 and 40-foot ladders were commonplace, although you didn't use them except when you had a tree that was that big. The old seedling groves, like the King Grove, or the Burton Grove, or some of these others down there at Carter Island. You know, they used to come and borrow our long ladders to pick those great big ceilings at Carter Island here in Lake County. But anyway.
Now, what about cypress ladders? Were the ladders made in Florida that were made with cypress?
Yes, I don't know when the cypress ladders first started, but the cypress ladders were made, let's say, for picking crews south of Lake County, Polk County and south, and they were made out of cypress trees. They weren't of great diameter, but say about 3 inches or so, 3.5 inches, that were straight as they could be, and then brought in and dried and split. And then that split half, they were peeled and split, and that split half became the sides to the ladders. And as I understand it, they went out into the swampland and cut a tree called a Florida ash. There's still a few of those around, and it had much of no use except for to make ladder rounds out of. So they cut it in square pieces or stock and turned them down on the end in a lathe, so you had a sort of a square step and a tapered end that you drilled a hole in the ladder and went into the ladder and held it together. But it had a little bit of a taper to the ladder, but not much like the California ladder did. It had a little bit of taper from top to bottom, but not a whole lot.
Now, was there a manufacturer of ladders in Groveland? I thought I remember seeing a place down there that...
I don't know of one that was in Groveland, but the cypress ladders were built all over the state of Florida. Just every little country boy who wanted to could. It was very easy to do and build ladders. So a lot of different people made those handmade, homespun ladders.
Why were the California ladders different?
Don't ask me, I don't know.
I'm just curious. You said
The California ladders had quite a taper to them. They came up to a point, and I went out there 2 or 3 times studying what they did and how they did it and see how it would apply to us. They were the first to have aluminum ladders, and in the state of Florida wouldn't let us have aluminum ladders because of the fear of lightning and electrical wires. And until the electric companies acknowledged that they would hang the drops no more than 18 feet to the ground were we ever allowed to have aluminum ladders in our groves. And that was way later on. There were some others that came in between.
Now, talk a little bit about the spacing between the rungs on the ladder.
All right, for some reason in Lake County and north, the spacing just had to be, the pickers wouldn't use the other ladder, it would stay on the ladder trailer. It had to be 12 inches apart, center to center. And you went down to Polk County and they had to be 18 inches apart. And if somebody brought some down there, they'd stay on the trailer, nobody'd use them. It was just tradition, I guess. They had their own personal reasons, I have no idea. Realizing that, of course, that ladder was part of where you set your bag as you moved up and down the tree and filled the bag full of fruit. It was an important part, and it was also an important thing to get one of your legs kind of twisted around it. One leg was solid, the other one was on somehow or other to keep your balance. You needed 2 hands to pick with and 2 legs to hold onto that ladder with.
Now, using the long ladders, how in the world could a man handle a 38 or 40-foot ladder in those trees?
It usually took 2 people to stand it up, and wasn't much of a problem. They got the ladders and they all cooperated and stood up their ladder. But then you took a ladder rung that was about the length of your hand from the ground, and what you do is you pick up the ladder just an inch or 2, and the other one was way up the ladder, you know, and you picked up the whole ladder, and then you watched it, you balanced it, and walked with it. Even with a shorter one, you did that to it. But it was a little bit, the old timers knew how to do it. The new guy had a lot to learn.
And they still went up and down that ladder with the
Yes. Yeah.
picking sack on their shoulder.
Yes, I always respected the skill that those fruit pickers had, because it wasn't something you learned overnight. In 2 or 3 weeks at least, just to get in physical shape to handle all the weight and the picking bag and climbing up and down that ladder and setting the ladder in the tree. You didn't just lean it in there. You put it in sideways, and you'd kind of get it where you wanted it, and you pushed it into the tree and then turned it to lock it in there so it wouldn't slip in either direction. So it was quite a skill. I was always impressed with what they did and got no credit for.
Now, as harvesting director at Lake Region, I understand that early on in your career you became intimately familiar with ladders. So tell us about what would go on in the summertime to repair and fix the ladder.
Yeah, well, let me start by telling you that the harvesting manager, I took that job because nobody else would have it. I was a fresh kid out of college and nobody else would have it, you know, so there I was, and that was all it was, and I really wanted to come into Lake County, get out of Polk County, and anyway, so during the summer months we took all the ladders and went through them and repaired them, and we may cut them off, some of them may have been busted at the top or busted at the bottom, and you may do what you could. Every year we would replace the ladder. Some of them, we'd bring in a couple hundred or so anyway of new ladders. So we had new ladders, and the old ladders they kept getting shorter and shorter every year. If it was a step missing, a round missing, we had tools to cut the ladder, the round material to the right length, and then bracing bit that would cut the taper on the end of the ladder round. So you real quickly understood how much work it was to make a ladder round. So if you had a bad ladder and you cut off a piece, the first thing you did was go down and carefully save that old step, because each one of them was a different size as it went up there. Not a whole lot of taper to it, but there was a little taper. So it was easier to find a good one, a good ladder. You'd bang it on the table to make sure it sounded right and what have you, that made a good step, because that grain had to be real tough, and it ran through the ladder, so it would hold that 200-pound man and a 90-pound bag of fruit. So, but anyway, we would go through each ladder, and we had gadgets to pull the nails out with, and we would take the ladder apart where needed, spread it apart, put the ladder round in. And you usually had to take 2 or 3 of the rounds loose in order to do that, and made sure the ladder was sound and safe and ready for use next year. And you had to have quite a few extra ladders, because first of all you had different lengths for different heights of trees. You really didn't want the ladder to stick out of the tree more than about 2 feet. And if you let the crew go to the grove with ladders that stuck out 6 or 8 feet, the next thing you know, you'd find short pieces of the ladder where they'd cut it off. You know, and that was not a very profitable thing.
Make it to fit. Did a picker have his ladder? I mean, or you just took
Sometimes they did. Sometimes the fruit pickers moved from crew to crew for price. And some were faithful old guys that would stay with us, you know, no matter what. They didn't want the complication or go hunting another bus or go hunting, you know. But they all knew what somebody else was paying, so some of them would not. But lots of them had their own ladders. They'd have them marked, or they knew which one it was, had knife cuts in it or something.
Now, if I remember correctly, for many years, this was my tree. A picker would pick a tree and by himself, and
yes,
it wasn't, I'll go down this side of the road and you go down that side of the road. That's my tree, and you get your own tree to pick.
For some reason, that never worked, and in fact, it ended up when the Spanish people got here. That's my road, and I'm not going to be here tomorrow. Don't let anybody on my road. But one end of the row, of course, would be better fruit picking than the other end. So that's how they made things correct for one another. But yes, a lot of times I'd go in and pick a tree. The most I ever heard of was in a lice grove when we're still that 42-foot ladder thing in Mount Verde, that a grapefruit tree, Tony McCullum told me, picked 92 boxes. When I first came, he had to drive me all the way down there and point out that tree to show me that 92 box grapefruit tree, and that took a fruit picker all day long to pick that one tree. But normally they'd pick 8 or 10 boxes, you know, an adult tree, and normally a fruit picker would attempt to pick 100, 120 boxes a day. A good physical specimen would do pretty well.
Yeah, of course those trees were set 30 by 30, most of those
20,
grapefruit trees.
25 by 25 up to 48 by 48, yes, yeah.
Okay. Now, at Lake Region, during your tenure, you went from the wooden field crates into larger pallets, 10-box pallets. Tell us about the evolution there from individual field crates into the bigger box.
Yeah, the field crate that we had, of course, was standardized. It was a standard field crate, and it was it held 90 pounds of fruit and was so many inches. It was one box, and 90 pounds of oranges, 85 pounds of grapefruit, and 95 pounds of Nancy tangerines. So it was a standard box, but we knew that the apple people had gone to the bigger bin some years ago, and there were some purchased here and there that they just sat on the lot and rotted because the people just refused to use them, you know, couldn't see the merit in it. So when I first got here, I was a young, stupid college kid, you know. I'd had some military experience in between. It interrupted my life for a while, but I was about 27, I guess, and the management at Lake Region asked me what I could do about those bins. I said I'll convert them over, you know, and just like I knew what I was doing, but I didn't. But anyway, so I went out there and looked it over and figured it out, and I came back and said I need a pickup truck, and they had a Volkswagen for me. And I said I can't carry a 10-box bin around in a pickup truck. I got to go sell this thing to those people. So they gave me an old raggedy pickup truck, you know, and I put a 10-box bin in the thing. And we at Lake Region had established our own bin. It was 24 by 24 inches and 24. No, I didn't write. Anyway, our bin ended up being a slight bit different than everybody else in the state because we were one of the first to do it. It was more like an apple bin than it was the citrus bin that was adopted later on. Anyway, so I took a bin, put it back in my truck, and would drive up to the crew and find the crew foreman and tell him what I wanted to do, and wanted to put on a little demonstration, what have you, so he'd be in charge of what was going on because you know, I'd learned from the military, you know, leadership top down. So he'd gather up all the crew, and do I need to stop? I'm ringing. This is, anyway, let me just turn it off. Anyway, the crew foreman went out and rounded up all the fruit pickers, and we went by the side, by the grove outside. And what I had done was ask the crew foreman to have one guy pick me 10 boxes. And what they did was put these standard boxes side by side, and so there were 10 of them. And I knew that when they took those little boxes out on what they'd call a goat and take it out the trailer and load it on the trailer, there was always fruit falling off of it. And the loaders always had a few empty boxes in. They always filled their boxes. At the end of the day, each of them had 20, 25 boxes of fruit that they didn't pick, but they had picked up because there was too much fruit in the box. So I knew that. So we set that bin out there, and I asked the fruit pickers to go put 10 boxes in that bin. I said 10 boxes is just level full. I want you to smooth it out. I don't want any dips in it. I don't want any mountains on it. I just want it level full. So they did, and all of a sudden it was like a bunch of hens cackling, you know, because there was another box sitting there. That bin, that 10-box bin that we were willing to pay them for 10 boxes only had 9 of those little boxes in there. And I knew why it did, but I don't think they really knew the math well enough. So our next problem was that we only had 4 goats that we put loader arms on. And all of a sudden, everybody and his brother, the fruit pickers, would go to the crew that had the 10-box bin, and the little crew that had the little boxes did not have fruit pickers. So we had to do something about it that summer. We built 17 more loader trucks and that first year we had 42,000 of those little 1-box wooden bins. The next year we didn't repair so many of them. We went through and selected the big ones. So we went into the next year with about 22,000. And by the third year we were 100% 10-box bins. And the efficiency and the improvement and everything was just enormous for the packing house, for the loaders, for everything else. It was just a giant step forward when we went to the 10-box bin.
So you went from the wooden small boxes, field crates, directly to the pallets, no plastic boxes or aluminum boxes or anything?
The plastic boxes were used for cannery fruit. They weren't used for fresh fruit.
Okay.
So, they just simply didn't work too good because it didn't take long for the fruit picker to realize that that little plastic box had more fruit than it should have. It didn't take them long to figure that one out. And they didn't want them. And so we got rid of the two we had, and they got used, I guess. But the aluminum boxes, they were little boxes the same size, and they were standardized. And some guy showed up and wanted us to use some of the aluminum. We still had this was prior to the 10-box bin. We still had the little trucks that held 117 or 16 or 18 or something like that of the little boxes, we called them straight jobs, back and forth to the packing house. Looked like ants going back and forth. And our trailers in those days some of them were 36 foot. That was a big trailer. And some of them were as low as 32, or there was even 4 of them that were shorter than that. So trucks would go and come. Later on, they were 44-foot trailers, 45-foot trailers, the flats were, that held our 10-box bins, So efficiencies were gained there. But anyway, the story with the aluminum box, you'll still see a few of them around. But this guy came around and said, I want to make you enough for 2 truckloads, and I'll put your name on it, and I want you to use them, and you'll buy them after you use them. Well, they worked just fine. They were going to last longer than the wooden box, but when you loaded them on the truck, there was nothing to keep them on the truck. They were slicker than blocks of ice. So when you went around the corner, they all fell off. They just slid right off the truck. They tied them down as tight as they could, and some from the middle would slide out of the middle off the truck, right in the middle of the road. So that didn't last very long.
Now the pallets, you said you had your own pallets. Did they ever get a standardized?
Yeah, Ridge pallet, I don't think there was any real law. Maybe there was later on, but Ridge pallet then started making them out of plywood, where ours were slatted hardwood pallets, like what the Apple industry used. And there was one other company on the river that had the same size as we did, but it wasn't a big problem to us. We'd rather not anybody else use our bins anyway, but there became a common Ridge pallet plywood bin that Ridge pallet produced for years and years and years.
And you also had a half pallet for tangerine.
Yes, we decided the hydraulic pressure on Dancy tangerine was causing bad deliveries, so we had too much weight on the bottom fruit. So we just divided it in two, 12 inches high. And we built, Ridge Pallet built us a plywood box. That was when we were all of a sudden working with Minute Maid, who had probably a third of the Dancy tangerines in the state of Florida. And we were just overwhelmed with Dancy tangerines suddenly. And Minute Maid paid for them, and with $85,000 worth of boxes they bought, I remember. And it more than paid for it the first year. We could get a real decent pack out of them, and the fruit wasn't squashed, and we were still putting them in wooden, what we called spruce boxes. They still put corn in today. Putting the Dancies in them and ship them in those spruce containers.
All right. Ready to move on to a couple of things. John,
Can I stop and ask one more question? The Bruce boxes, can you tell us a little bit about the evolution of the boxes that, starting from when they were first done with those?
Standard nails?
Yes.
All right. I guess it was 1935 when the DOC, Department of Citrus, started in business. And the reason why, there were too many used car salesmen in our business. We didn't have any test standards, and we didn't have any container standards, and we didn't have any standards that the grower could depend on, or the fruit picker, or anybody else. So they issued some rules and regulations that are laws, and then they became rules and regulations. But our first field box changed to the one we used that I was describing. It delineated exactly the number of cubic inches in that box on either end, and had a panel in between, and the exact size of that box. So everybody, the fruit grower, everybody was being taken care of. And then on the fresh side of the thing, we had been packing prior to that what we called a standard nail box. And what that meant was it was a box that had two ends in the middle, sort of like the field box we were using. And then it had a wooden slat that went over the top of it, and you nailed it all together. And that thing weighed in excess of 90 pounds. And so it became just a little bit unwieldy. And the Second World War came along, and somewhere in there, not exactly sure where it was, but Bruce Floyd invented and patented the standard the Bruce container. That's the one that is made out of, used to be made out of magnolia, and had a wooden end on either end of it, and it came in various sizes. You know, it came in a half box, you know, or what we later called a carton. It came in a flat. Some people thought that the hydraulic pressure in there, the fruit on it, so it was a flat that's supposed to hold the same amount as the Bruce box. Now, the Bruce box, of course, as I said, he had the patent on it. It came from Bruce Floyd over in Leesburg. And that became the standard in the industry. Still about the same size container we pack corn in, because it's a wooden box and you dip it in cold water. And peaches sometimes are packed in. A lot of things that we pack that we need to be dipped in water are still packed in a wood slat or wood veneer, I guess is the right word, box. It's and the veneer pieces and then cut and put together by a machine. You know, and anyway, and then it's got three pieces of wire around it, and then the thing is wired together and closed in the packing house. Anyway.
And was it true that Dick Pope was a salesman for him?
I don't know that.
I don't know. That story several times.
I don't know. For Bruce Floyd?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
They said he was one who
I'll ask his son. That Bruce Floyd, that was B.G. Floyd's uncle.
Oh, okay.
Uncle.
Carol Floyd was his brother.
Yeah.
We talked to Glenn.
And Bill Floyd.
We talked to Glenn Tyre yesterday about Carol, so kind of an interesting family with some divergence, but obviously a very creative group of guys that put the Bruce box together and what Carol did with processing. All right, you were with a co-op for your entire career. All right? Tell us a little bit about the role of co-ops, especially in this part of the state, and what it was like to interact with growers. You went from harvesting manager to general manager, and you dealt with growers and buyers and everything else. I want to talk a little bit about that.
Well, it sounds like I deliberately picked a co-op to go to work with, and that wasn't the case. I picked Lake Region Packing because I could see there were a lot of old gentlemen there that would soon retire. At least it looked like they would, you know, rather than go to work for Lakes Pasco. I thought I turned it off. Okay, I didn't slide it. That's all. Anyway, excuse me. Start that over. All right. You sound like you thought I picked a co-op to work for because there was something of value I saw. What I saw in value was that Lake Region had a bunch of older gentlemen working there, and there would be opportunity to come in the future if I could get things moving and working my way. That I would be in line for a better, you know, career opportunity. So. As opposed, Lakes Pasco offered me a job and in sales, and they were undecided. But anyway, it's funny how your life is changed by a simple decision. But anyway, a co-op is set up under a set of rules and regulations that came about from 1933, which is different than any a for-profit corporation. We've got some advantages and disadvantages, and that's a long story, and there's no need to go into it. But we take care of many of our growers became members, and many of them are absentee growers. And being an absentee grower, you needed somebody to do all the services and everything. Many of them were widows who needed somebody to take care of because they had no clue what to do. Dad had worked all of his life and left it to his kids or something. They were widows or something. So that's what Lake Region or the co-op fit, you know, is somebody that could take your fruit, pack your fruit, return you a good margin on your fruit, and also return some of the profits that the packing house made on the charges they made to you. So that was called patronage, and it's set up under IRS rules for specific reasons. But it had its following, and then there were people that were real active in the grows who did their own growth care. They wanted wanted to have control of the price, and they knew, or they thought they knew what the deal was and what have you. But in my experience looking backwards, and for years, I could see that people in a co-op over a 10-year average would probably do just as good as that finest person out there who got the top price every now and then, but then got stuck every now and then by not having somebody or the right pickers or the right people or the right equipment or something to get his fruit in, or the right contacts to get his fruit in. So over the long haul, I don't think there was much difference in them, and the grower acquired equity or ownership in the packing house as to IRS rules on a percent, so many cents per box. At the end, ours was 10 cents a box. There were some co-ops that were charging as much as 25 cents, 35 cents a box. And that was your ownership in the place. And when we shut it down and started the disillusionment process, we paid them back all of their equities, except for a few percentage points that we could not find those people. So we ceded that to the state.
And that was rare, because from my limited experience, the retains or the ownership that
equity
growers had almost disappeared. In fact, a friend of mine was a CPA, and he gave zero value to, even though you had all these retains. So Lake Region is probably one of the only co-ops that I know of that actually paid back the retains, paid back the ownership.
Well, there were a number of them throughout the country. There's lots of examples of that, you know, some of the milk and butter people and grain people, but we were fortunate enough to have bought a good piece of property way back there on a lake, and that was our biggest kicker that kept us going when we were in the dissolution process. You had to have a lot of cash to go through and do all the environmental and everything else. But that covered everything, you know, without making it dissolve to little nothing. In fact, we have a little bonus left over for the last standing grows as to the way our bylaws were set up.
But now Lake Region still exists, even though the packing house is gone and everything else.
The co-op is gone, and according to our bylaws, we have a last standing group, and they are still in existence. And there were 36 of those people, and the groves were being picked off by developers here in the county. When we saw that rooftops were beginning to outnumber treetops, we knew there was time to act and react. And we did that, and we shut it down, and still growers left between the time we shut it down and started moving fruit down. We joined up with Dundee, and another co-op, almost identical to what we were, had the same CPAs that did the accounting. So it was a real smooth move, and a lot of them sold their, couldn't stand by and see that $30,000, $35,000 an acre price for their grows, and a lot of them sold until we decided and came to the point where it was the last member standing after we had done considerable work in tearing down the place and cleaning it up and figured out what it's going to cost and everything else. So in the meantime, a number of them left. So they became non-active growers but got their equity. The growers that were left became the last standing group and got their equity, plus they're going to get a little bonus money on top of that, but they were still involved. And that's the theory of a co-op, is that the people who are currently participating are the ones that own the equity and control in the place, and those others are simply standing in the wings waiting for a refund.
I remember going across the street from the office, and you all had your own marketing sales force. You
Yes.
sold your fruit. You didn't go through any Seal Sweet or anybody like that.
Years ago, we were in Seal Sweet, you know, and I think it was sometime in the early 50s when we decided that we wanted to be on our own. Mr. Pravat, long before I got there, and he dropped out, and one of the salesmen from Seal Sweet, Bob Fox, came up and became our sales manager, and we did our own sales from that point on.
You sold directly to the buyers.
Directly to the buyers.
Y'all made the trips up north and
Yes.
cultivated the chain stores.
There's one story that I need to tell you because it's interesting in sales. We had a concept, and everybody in the industry had the concept of having rollers. That is, a lot was depending on the rails to get our fruit up north, so we had rollers. We couldn't sell the fruit. We knew that ABC Fruit Company in Detroit or New York was going to need more than what they had already ordered. So we, especially just before Christmas and just before Thanksgiving, in those days when there was embargo, we had to shut down, we had these rollers. They were unsold fruit, whole train car loads of them, and maybe a half a train of them, so maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 of them. And some of them, when they called us, and we'd send some of them towards Chicago and some towards New York and some towards Philadelphia, unsold. And the guys would call and say, "You got a roller for me?" "Yep." "How many you want? What do you want? What size do you want?" We'd already pre-sized. We knew what that market would take, so we'd already loaded the right size on the rollers. And then every now and then, some of them would get lost. We had no idea where they were. So that was the railroad's problem. And I heard stories when I first got there that some of them were 20 and 30 days before they found them. And with little to no refrigeration, and a lot of them were ice bunkers in those days. Later on, there were diesels, but still they ran out of fuel, But oh, that was a gooey mess, and we never let them bring them back. But they'd have a whole carload of rotten fruit stuck together,
Now, when was the packing house in Tavares built? That was an old house that ran for years and years.
Okay.
Your overhead must have been relatively low.
Well, most of the packing houses were originally set up on railroads, and originally the buildings were given to us by a railroad. And then, as time went by, we got title to it and so forth, and then we added on to the properties and tore that building down and built another one. Our original one was in the park in Tavares, and right in the middle of the park. And then they built a big old frame one there. I don't know the exact date. And then in '64, they tore down that great big frame one and built the one that you remember. And it was there and kept adding on to it, though, until we shut down in '05, I think it was. Yes, it's nice to be mortgage free and what have you, but that's really a small amount when you talk about the amount of fruit you're harvesting, your fruit, your value of it, and what have you. It's nice to have your own walking around money, but still, you can go bust in 1 year just having a pocket full of money to start in the fruit business, because everything can turn south in a hurry in the produce business. It's exciting. No 2 years are the same, and it's never your daddy's business.
Now, where did your juice fruit row go?
Our juice fruit went to a number of places before the '48 change in the concentrate thing, and Plymouth opened up, and we were part of building that Plymouth operation. We were equity holder. It was a co-op, and we built. Minute Maid had the first one in Auburndale. The old McDonald packing house turned into a juice plant, and they put in the first Buffalo evaporators there, and so it started down there, and until so many big ones were built down south that for a long time Plymouth was the biggest in the state, and the big companies down south, the big corporate companies, almost made it too far to haul. A lot of the fruit business was down in Immokalee and LaBelle, and it was easier to haul to Tropicana and to Auburndale than it was way up here. So there was a juice plant in Ocala. I don't know if you remember that or not. Libby owned that, but it was just too far to come, and so that was one of the reasons we just didn't have the fruit volume in the plant, and we shut it down. Lake Region was one of the main board members. We ended up being the prime owners had the biggest percentage ownership after we bought out some of the other guys in Plymouth Citrus Growers Cooperative. No, that ain't right. Products, yes. Plymouth Citrus Products Cooperative, yes. The other was a packing house, yeah.
All right, a couple other things, John. You've seen the evolution of harvesters and everything. Were you at Lake Region when they had offshore labor that was there?
I was not there when they had the first offshore labor, what we call BWI, British West Indies. They had a labor camp and what have you. That had stopped a year or so before we got there. Your administrations have different opinions as to whether we should do that or not. And then the Bracero program came along, and that didn't work too good. That was in the days of Ike. President Ike and Eisenhower, and then later on the H-2A program came by.
One thing that was interesting, for years and years, the industry paid harvesters daily. What kind of logistics was that involved with trying to get all that cash and keep up with the records and pay everybody cash daily?
Well, it was a big problem, and to bring out that much cash to the Grove every day, everybody worried about it. I don't think we had any problem, but there were some people in the state that that were robbed, and it was a big. Computers came along, but there was it wasn't a big problem to keep records of exactly how much a fruit picker was to get. But sometimes the crew foremans got advances from him and took advantage of him and this and that. And wage and hour law changed that. When it did, we had to go to checks and a stub and his fruit on the stub, and it was a blessing that we were paying 3 times a week, 3 checks a week to each picker, which is a monster job with computers, and we're using a card system in those days. We've come a long ways, but we're going to go a lot further. But it was a more equitable thing for the fruit picker to get off that cash deal and go to the printed check with a stub on it. We even had one of our crews. FBI showed up one day and wanted the records on one of our crews. He ended up going to jail for involuntary servitude, that is slavery. He was taking all their money and wouldn't let them get a thing. So they were always in debt to the company store, but that slowly but surely ended when the wage and hour stepped in and corrected things. That was really a good thing.
Now, we had offshore labor, and then we evolved into domestic folks. How fast did we move into having a lot of the Mexican, and they were migrants, but how many of them really were migrants, and how many lived here, and did you become dependent upon that?
Yeah, so we had primarily black crews up until the freeze of '83. There were almost 100% blacks, and after the freeze of '83, our demand for fruit pickers dropped off, and when we started back, for some reason or other, there was adequate supply of Spanish labor, usually Mexicans, and there was not much of any law against that. Whether or not they were American citizens or not wasn't a consideration in those days when we first started. But over time, they kept putting pressure on us with 2 or 3 different laws. Wage and Hour came out with 2 or 3 different versions, and eventually became a tighter market up in about '73 when Disney was coming along. Was a tight market, but after the freezes and what have you, it became when we started back into the Mexicans. It became really tight after a while when they started raiding people and taking all their people to leave, and hit a packing house down south, and out of 109 employees in there, they took 103 that day. So they didn't have a packing house any longer, you know. So.
One last question with the harvesting. We're going to do some interviews in part on mechanical harvesting, and tell me a little about the experiences that you and Lake Region had with mechanical harvesting.
We tried mechanical harvesting, and it was a good idea, but the chemical we used started the deterioration of the fruit, allowing it to fall off, but the fruit was beginning to decay, and you had to get it to the juice plant in a hurry. And there were a lot of people who didn't understand that, including the juice plant, so they'd bend the fruit, and that wasn't the way you should do it. You should have direct run it. There was just a lot of problems that we weren't able to solve with the existing machinery and the existing juice plants we had. So it wasn't a failure. It was a good idea. A lot of good machines were made, but we would have had to redo the plant. And all of a sudden, for whatever reason, I don't remember, labor became plentiful again, and that ended the program. We ended up with 3 different programs in mechanical harvesting. And again, what shut them down is ample labor. Today, we got the H2A program that works. And there's mechanical harvesting equipment in Immokalee sitting there abandoned now.
Well, you used trunk shakers, I believe, that were modified from the pecan industry.
That's right.
Used to harvest pecans.
That's right.
So we were a number of things.
We used a pecan shaker to get it on the ground. We cleared the ground, we put it on the ground, then we used a tomato harvester to rake it together and pick it up and separate the trash. It would fall through the mesh in the thing and load it in a trailer. And the bad part about it is it was sitting down in the ground, picking up all kinds of fungus diseases. We'd already damaged the skin with our chemicals to loosen it up, and we ended up with all kinds of problems with that fruit. It didn't have much shelf life on it. You had to get it squeezed in 24 hours or you didn't have any fruit.
Yeah. I remember seeing parked in lots these conveyor lifters. I guess that was before goats came along, that you would use a conveyor belt to dump it in juice trailers.
Yeah, that was the old system you were talking about, those little plastic bins. That's what they, they'd come up and dump those into the conveying system and put them up there. And it didn't take us long to figure out how to make a goat body that would go up in the air and dump directly into the trailer. That didn't stay around long, but some of the machinery was still around for years, and you saw it, and some of the people just didn't have money for all it, so they still use the old way of doing it. It takes a while to convert everybody, but progress continues, change continues every day.
Well, I think there's some talk now, at least used to be, that we go back to a system somewhat like that, where we can eliminate a whole lot more trash in the groves rather than hauling trash into the processing plant.
Well, the juice plant just simply changed it. I don't know, the juice plants don't have much problem eliminating it today. They just go through a trash eliminator with rollers that are a little far apart, and then they convey it. And I've heard that story, but I talked to juice plant owners, and they say it's not a big problem. They don't want the fruit to touch the ground, though, to pick up bacteria or fungus diseases they bring into the plant. But they've been able to solve that problem too with the proper pasteurization and enough time and enough equipment. And I haven't heard about that in a long time.
Very good. Babe Pravat is in the Hall of Fame. I didn't know Mr. Pravat, and of course what happens is people like that over time, stories grow. It takes a life of its own. And how much interaction did you have with Mr. Pravat?
Oh, I had a lot of interaction with Mr. Pravat. He was a neat gentleman. He didn't always get along with the management at Lake Region, even though he was chairman of the board. So Mr. Kemp would give me keys to his car and say, go pick up Mr. Pravat and waste a day with him. So don't bring him back here to this office. So I'd go out and he'd tell me stories and this and that, on and on about his cow days and his, the early days of what, you could tolerate, what you couldn't, There were days when things were quite a bit different than they are today. But I could share some stories, and maybe I should, but most of the stories that I know about are a buyer and a seller, a situation that appeared, and anyway, I'd have to stop. Really, I'd have to stop and think about something that would be appropriate,
So
can I tell you all the story real quick? You can film it if you want. I thought it was funny. Mr. Pravat told me the story, and I told his kids and his grandkids this, that what's the name of the guy in town in Eustis that had the appliance business? Whitford was the first in the area to have refrigeration, and they had those little square boxes. GE made them with the round things on top of them, itty bitty little boxes. And that was the standard for 4, 5, 10 years. I don't know, everybody had one of those little things. And Babe went by the place and he had a double door, great big refrigerator. He said, I want that. And he told Mr. Whitford to take it to his house. And this was probably in the early 50s, maybe the late 40s, early 50s, I think. But anyway, could have been, and take it to his house. He did, and he set it up. And Mr. Pravat had a maid and a cook. And they filled it up with stuff, and the milk spoiled. So he called Mr. Whitford up and says, my milk spoiled, something wrong. He said, I'll be out and fix it. So he went out there and worked on it and what have you, and it wasn't any rocket science. I mean, it was just a little compressor, just like the other ones were, but this was just a bigger model and a bigger compressor. So thing was supposed to be fixed. Well, 2 days later, Mr. Pravat calls him again and says, the milk spoiled. So, well, I got to go out there and I'll fix it, So this milk spoil thing happened about 3 more times. So Whitford went out there again. He was getting pretty tired of this, the milk spoiling, And he couldn't get in the house. The house was locked. So we went around the side of the house and peered in the kitchen window. And there sat the cook with both doors of the refrigerator up, sitting in a chair as far up in the refrigerator she could put her feet. See, now that was before the day of air conditioning. And the milk spoiled. But we had a lot of characters in our business, that were they were fun to be around, and Mr. Paul was one of them. Bob Paul, he stuttered so much he told all kinds of stories, and they would tell stories on one another and try to outdo one another. But you had the big moguls that did well, that bought and sold fruit, and Duke Crittenton, and you just go on and on. The Morris family, Mr. Morris, that's way back, and they're the Cooks, and and they're all competing with one another, and yet they were all best of friends, When we got down to a crop of fruit, they weren't friends anymore, I can remember one time that there was a fruit buyer that was trying to buy some fruit, and he had a little drinking problem. And I won't use any names, but he had a drinking problem. And there was only one liquor store in town. So one of the other fruit buyers went down there a day before and locked up, paid the package store and the bar to close for 3 days. So that other grower got down there and stayed in the hotel down there that night. He was going to buy some fruit. Well, he didn't have any liquor, and he had to go back to Winter Haven. So that gave him a leg up on I didn't use any names, but their grandkids are still around. But anyway, they did all kinds of things to one another, They really had a good time in doing it,
Well, I marvel at how everybody shared, up to a point like that. In Lake County with the co-ops that were here, Mountain Door had a co-op, Lake Region and Golden Gem and Umatilla, some of the bigger ones that were here. So it was an industry. How was your interaction with grower members? Besides the board of directors, what the relationship? You said you talked a lot of widows and everything else.
Okay, let me go back. You said something in there. The Golden Gem was a co-op. Golden Gem was actually part of Lake Region, and 4 of the directors split off because Mr. Pravat wasn't interested in a juice plant. He didn't understand how it worked. He didn't understand pound solids. He didn't understand why we had to do all that he wanted to stay with fresh fruit, so they split away, and that's how it all got started. And but anyway, my relationship with growers, it's kind of family. I mean, we've gotten cats out from underneath trees. I've even climbed underneath somebody's house with a dead dog because I said I could do it, and went underneath there and took an army entrenching tool and dug a hole and pulled that dead dog into that hole and covered it up. We did everything for these people, whatever it took, because they were part of our family, and we had monthly cookouts for them, and they would come down just for the food and to see what's going on. And they had a room in the building there. It was sort of like a covered dish supper that they would have at the church, but Lake Region would provide everything. I think that was a little before my time, but they had a real camaraderie, and we even had some 2nd and 3rd generation employees too. It's sort of a family way of looking at things instead of a cold, here's $1 for your box of fruit, I may or may not work with you next year. We had a long-time relationship. We were going to pick their fruit, take care of their fruit, make sure they had good-looking fruit to bring in the packing house the next year. So it was.
A number of people that were on the board. Mr. Osgood, B.B. Osgood from Montverde, was he chairman of your board for a number of years?
Long time. He came here after the stock market crash in '28 when his dad had a grove, and his dad was a board member and was in Lake Region, and BB came down here as a young man, a little frame house in the grove where they lived. But Dad had lost everything but that grove, and he was proud of that grove and he wanted to keep the grove, but he lost all of his stocks and bonds and everything else. So Mr. Osgood grew up there and ended up being the chairman of the board for 25 years. Pravat came there and about that same time, 25, 26, somewhere in there. And Pravat was chairman of the board for 20 plus years. I don't remember. But he retired in '71 and BB took over, BB Osgood.
But we could go on and on about all these growers and everything else. And we'll come back and talk, John.
Okay.
But thanks.
All right, well,
Can
thank you.
Say and spell your name on tape for me?
Okay, my name is John Veldhuis. Veldhuis is V-E-L-D-H-U-I-S. And we wear wooden shoes.